James Dean's Porsche crashed into Donald Turnipseed's Ford at 5:45 p.m. on September 30th, 1955. The 24-year-old actor was killed instantly, his neck broken and his body ripped apart by the impact, which catapulted the car along the highway. Miraculously, Rolf Wertherick survived with over 20 broken bones as he was thrown into the roadside. Donald Turnipseed suffered only minor bruising.
My name is Joy Gorelli. I was working as a police clerk at the Paso Robles Police Department at the time of the James Dean accident. This call was just a call that there was a bad accident out at the Y.
My name is Ernie Tripke. I was a member of the California Highway Patrol working out of the Paso Robles office the night in which James Dean was killed in an auto accident. Ron and I had just reported for duty at the Paso Robles Police Department, which we worked out of at the time. And it was just before 6 o'clock in the evening.
My name is Ronald Nelson, and I was a California Highway Patrol at the time of the accident.
When we received the call of the accident, Ron and I were in separate vehicles, and we proceeded to the scene of the accident, which was at the intersection of Highway 41 and 46. When we arrived at the scene of the accident, we found a 51 Ford coupe in the roadway.
And the Porsche was probably northwest, over next to the fence. The damage to Turnipseed's car was extensively in the left front. Now, the damage to the Porsche was the entire left side.
When we arrived at the scene, I had no idea who any of the participants in the accident were. I found out it was James Dean, whom I had never heard of at the time. During the course of the investigation, several vehicles stopped and asked, is that Dean's car or is that James Dean's car?
The only James Dean, or Jimmy Dean, I knew was the singer and the sausage maker.
Life in its every emotion leaps from the pages of John Steinbeck's best of all his bestsellers.
At the time of his death, only the first of Dean's films, East of Eden, had been released.
Of people who love so deeply, hate so fiercely, live so recklessly. Warner Brothers had to seek out vibrant new personalities, tap new sources of talent, create new stars. James Dean as Cal, the wildest boy you've ever met.
When we arrived, they were just loading the victims into the ambulance. That is the James Dean and his passenger. The other driver did not go to the hospital.
I think he went in first and then his mechanic went in later. But I was more interested in handling the traffic and taking pictures.
Sometime later, the ambulance came back and they were not under siren at all, and I knew that it was a fatal accident then, and they went right by the police department. They weren't going very fast, and I noticed a hand hanging out from underneath the covering on the stretcher, and it was blood on it. And of course we didn't know it was James Dean, and found out about it later.
We took statements from Turnipseed, and he says he did not see Dean approaching as he made his left turn. It was just about sundown, and kind of a gray horizon, and the silver-colored Porsche with a very low profile made it very difficult to see. And we did visit the site several days afterwards, approximately the same time, and it was quite true because the Porsche sort of blended in with the general landscape there. We interviewed some people, but no one was really in a position to tell us exactly what happened at the point of impact. They came upon the scene shortly afterwards, and we got statements from them, but there was no one there that was actually following Turnipseed or following Dean to give a real clear description of what happened.
As the wrecked Porsche was taken to a nearby garage, news of the death of James Dean started to filter through to the outside world.
I was working, I think, the 2 to 10 p.m. shift, and I got in around 9:30 or so, somewhere in that range, and was talking to one of the crew that was coming on at midnight for the graveyard, and one of the guys who was a friend of mine said, did you hear about James Dean getting killed? And I said, no, I didn't. Who's James Dean? He said, oh, he's a movie actor, just starting, and then it suddenly dawned on me, the name hit me then, and I reached in my pocket and pulled out the tickets, and sure enough, he was the one that I'd given the citation to.
James Dean was pronounced dead on arrival at Paso Robles Memorial Hospital, and his body was taken to a nearby funeral home. News of his death had now reached as far as Los Angeles.
I happened to be on a beach, was listening to music on the radio, it was a little radio on the bar, and they announced his death, that he was killed in a crash. And all I felt was an impact, just a strong impact, but nothing else. No pain, no feeling anything.
I've often wondered what it would have been like to have been there. I'm rather grateful that I wasn't. I don't know how I would have survived that.
Even though East of Eden was on general release, Jimmy was not yet a household name. So when his death made headlines all over America, the story read as the tragic waste of a young life, rather than the death of a major film star. Jimmy's funeral was held 8 days later, on October 8th, in a small Quaker church in his hometown of Fairmount. The church was packed with local townspeople. No film stars, no celebrities, and few of his friends.
I chose not to attend Jimmy's funeral in the first place because I couldn't afford to go back to Indiana. A Hollywood columnist was putting together a charter flight. I later found out, but I didn't know that at the time. I was torn. I knew the family, but I also knew what was going to go on. I knew it was going to become a circus. I just chickened out. I just couldn't face it. I just couldn't do it.
I stayed away because it would have caused great discomfort for the remaining, relatives. I knew that my being there would have caused an unpleasant stir. I don't want to do that, but I went there a month later, and I saw the first snowflake melting on his grave.
3,000 local people stood at Jimmy's graveside as he was laid to rest in Fairmount Cemetery. Elizabeth Taylor, co-star in his last film Giant, was too distraught to attend and sent flowers. In the 40 years since his death, Jimmy's grave has become a shrine for thousands of devoted fans. 3 days after his death, Warner Brothers released Rebel Without a Cause, which was followed by Giant, to the fanfare of a glittering, star-studded premiere. The films were instant hits. The legend of James Dean the movie star was born, just a few months after the real James Dean met his untimely death. For those critics that regarded Jimmy's career as a mere flash in the pan, Giant saw them grudgingly admit his talent.
This is Texas, mighty colossus of the Southwest, a land of infinite variety.
He stole the movie from Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and received his second posthumous Oscar nomination.
I'm a rich boy. Me, I'm gonna have more money than you ever thought of having.
Why, that's wonderful, Jim.
In the period following his death, Warners were deluged with 8,000 fan letters for Jimmy each week. As the studio publicity machine kicked into top gear, it was careful to play down the imminent coroner's inquest in case it tarnished the image of their golden boy.
There were 2 persons injured and 1 killed. Number 1 injured was Donald Gene Turnipseed, driver of vehicle number 1. Number 2 injured was Rolf Witherick, a passenger in the Dean car. The dead was James Byron Dean, DOA, or dead on arrival at the hospital.
The inquest was requested by us because it was the matter of determining if the other driver was sufficiently involved the accident to be declared at fault. And since Dean was deceased, he could not be prosecuted. Therefore, we had the coroner's inquest.
People seem to forget that that Porsche was very, very, very dangerous car to drive in at the time, the design of that car. And it was the slightest accident could have been catastrophic anyway.
We did do some background on the check on this, and we found out that Dean had received a citation on the Grapevine over near Bakersfield, about 25 miles south of Bakersfield, prior to the accident. In fact, he still had the citation on his person. And calculating that and the distance he had to travel, he averaged 69 miles an hour, and this was before the days of the freeways. It was all two-lane roadway at the time. The inquest wasn't a matter of liability, it was a matter to determine if anyone was involved, was sufficiently to blame to be charged with the death of Dean. The coroner's jury concluded an open verdict on the inquest, which indicated that they didn't recommend prosecution on anyone.
Donald Turnipseed's original statement that he had not seen Jimmy approaching absolved him of all blame. He refused to ever talk publicly about the crash and died in 1995. Jimmy's passenger, Rolf Wertherick, spent almost a year in hospital recovering from his injuries, and often appeared in print as the only crash witness prepared to talk.
1950 Model Ford was coming at us. Suddenly the car swung out. Jimmy hit. My head slammed against the dashboard. My body was thrown out of the car. I passed out instantly. When I came to, I saw Jimmy lying limp, covered with blood, bones fractured, his neck broken. He was beyond help. Anyone's help.
Rolf returned to Germany in the 1960s, where he became a racing driver himself, until his own death in 1981 in a drink-related car crash. In the years following Jimmy's death, the tabloid press fed off tales of his suicide and of his ghost stalking the highway. Even Vampira was accused of killing Jimmy by voodoo.
That voodoo thing, that voodoo talk came about because of the comedic character that I played, a vampire on television. And of course the tabloids picked it up when Jimmy died and saying, you know, made a big thing of it. Dead animals were left on my porch. I was followed by lunatics, and especially at the full of the moon, for about 20 years. That's why I'm so beautiful now. I've hardly slept. All these magazines came out saying, James Dean is not dead. He's hiding, he's bandaged, he's in a psychiatric hospital, but usually they said he's bandaged. He was badly wounded, but he's not dead, and he's heavily bandaged. Jimmy would have died laughing, but he couldn't, you know, because he was already dead.
One bizarre rumor that tarnished Jimmy's memory is that his coffin was allegedly broken open on the eve of his funeral, and his body tampered with prior to burial.
There was a very strange thing. Jimmy told me during the making of Rebel Without a Cause that there was a young fellow hanging around who was very infatuated with him and kept wanting at least a kiss.
Jack Simmons was a young man who appeared on the scene in my life and became my chauffeur. I didn't drive, and he had this old car, an old hearse. He made himself very handy. Jack was gay, and we didn't have the word gay then. He was queer, and dramatically so. And Jack fell hopelessly in love with Jimmy, and then he became a pain in the ass. Excuse my vulgarity, I don't usually use words like that. But he did become obnoxious, and Jimmy would say to him, yeah, take your clammy claws off me, because Jack was forever clutching him with his, you know, vulture-like claws, hungrily. They never had sex, of course. That goes without saying.
The night before the funeral, the funeral parlor was broken into and the casket was pried open. Word had it that it had been a young man who'd come along with the group from Hollywood who'd gone and done that. And it left that to my imagination to figure out why and what happened.
Jack said he was going to break open the coffin. When they said Jimmy was going to have a closed coffin. Jack said, I'm going to break it open and get what I never had.
You're tearing me apart!
Despite the attentions of scandalmongers, the artistry of James Dean remains untarnished to those who knew and admired him.
He had a humanness about him that a lot of people identified with. That makes him special.
It's hard to truly evaluate the impact that he had on us, all of us. And it didn't just fall on actors or actresses. I mean, it was everybody. Old and young, rich and poor, black and white, male and female, everybody, man.
I am involved. We are all involved. Mom, a kid was killed tonight.
He was a good actor. He was an absolutely excellent actor, ultimately. I never thought he was, as you know, from the beginning, until I sat in front of East of Eden, and I realized there was no question that this was a superb talent.
I'm glad I know I love you. Because now I know I wasn't imagining it all. I was even thinking I was bad. I love you even though I'm afraid of you.
I just know this little kid, this little confused kid with messy hair and glasses that never stayed up and that were broken most of the time. And how much fun it was to sit in the back seat of a car and have his arm around me and be held and sing songs. And know that I was being protected by somebody who had no idea what he was doing.